Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And, we do weekly bonus episodes on there. Right now we're covering Marvel What If, and I have guests every week covering that show. We've also done The Mandalorian, WandaVision, Loki. So we have a lot of fun on there. And I want to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. Well, I've got a familiar voice on the podcast. I've got Christopher R. Mihm. Say hi, Christopher.
Hello.
Hey, you've been on the show a couple times, sometimes to talk about your movies and other times to discuss movies. But if people haven't heard those episodes yet, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I am a filmmaker, an indie filmmaker. I make cheesy monster movies, like The Monster Phantom Lake or The Giant Spider. And you and I just sort of met at a convention down there in DFW, and I love your podcast. I just want to say that, and everyone listening knows that they love your podcast too. And I love the that movie part of it, the love part of it, I've always said this, and I want to say it just publicly here, that my favorite thing about your podcast is that it's not about ripping apart other people's art, which as an independent artist myself, I appreciate that. But movies is one of those things that really brings us all together, and it's great to see people and to have an outlet like this where we can just talk about the things that we love as opposed to trying to rip apart what's wrong with everything. And I hate that about our modern society, is that's so prevalent. And so I love the fact that your podcast is all about the love.
Now, to kind of segue into the movie that we're about to talk about, I want to remind my guests that if this is your first time listening, my guests actually pick the movie. So, I get a lot of emails and messages saying, when you cover this movie, I would like to talk about it. Well, the best part about that is you get to make that decision yourself. So, Christopher, what movie did you choose to talk about today?
The Tom Hanks written and directed, That Thing You Do.
Yes. I know that I've seen this, and I was telling you when I rewatched it that it felt brand new to me because I hadn't seen it in so long, but I know I've seen this before, probably when I was a kid. I'm going to say the fact that it's blurry for me, I'm going to say I was like 11 or something like that. I don't know. Not 11. Well, it couldn't have been because it came out in 1996, so I would have had to have been probably 13 or 14 when I saw it, but I will say that watching it again,
I won't. I mean, in 96, I was 20. And actually, the funny thing about this movie, if I may say really quick right off the bat, and part of the reason why I love it so much is there's actually a lot of reasons. Okay. But 96, I'm 20 years old, right? And at the time, I had met my wife, and we were just kind of hanging out. We weren't dating. We were just hanging out, and we'd just go see movies and stuff. Which I guess sounds like dating, but it wasn't dating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, y'all were friends.
We were friends, and we definitely had crushes on each other, but our situations at the time didn't work out. Okay,
Mm.
so we were just friends, and we would just go see movies together because we loved the movies, and we worked together, so we'd go see movies just to spend time. And there's a lot of story there as to the situation, but I just am not going to get into it because it has nothing to do with this movie. But we were hanging out a lot, and we went and saw. We used to do these things where she was the only person I knew who would go do movie marathons with me, right?
Aw, that's
Where we
awesome.
would just I love the movies. I love going to the movies. I miss going to the movies. Um, and so I one day we worked together. I said, I'm gonna totally go do a movie marathon. I want to go do a movie marathon this weekend, um, and just like see like 5 movies in a day. And none of my friends wanted to do that. They're just like, that is too many movies. And I was like, there is no such thing. And I mentioned that to her, and she's like, you know what? I don't actually have anything going on Saturday. I'm in. And I'm like, are you serious? And it was one of those, we're doing this kind of thing. It was like,
Aw.
because I'd never really done like 5 movies in a day where you see a movie, you go out, you buy a ticket for whatever's next, you go see another movie, right? So
Hmm.
we did. And we ended up seeing 5 movies that day. And I'll be honest, of all the ones we saw, that thing you do is the only one I remember from that day.
That's a good story. I love that.
So it stuck out as just like I don't know. I mean, after seeing that many movies, you get a little numb to it. It's like binge watching
Hmm.
a show. You
Yeah.
start sort of the details in the middle movies get a little squishy, but that was like probably the third movie we saw before we went and grabbed some like McDonald's or something. Just before we hit like the 7 and the 9:30. So we saw that. And I remember we just left the theater and was like, that was amazing. That was so good. And we just talked about it the whole time I think we ate like McDonald's. Um, and so that one really stuck out. Now, later when we actually did start dating and then eventually got married and, had kids and have now been married for 20 years, um, it became our movie. So that
Oh, that's
because
so
that one stuck
nice.
out as just like we love that movie, and I think maybe that was probably one of those moments where it was like we like each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but
That was a
this
good
is
test.
cool.
Can you sit
Yeah,
through 5 movies with me?
and we did. And it was great. I think by the last one, I might have fallen asleep because it was really boring, and I was just kind of done. But
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember which one it was. But yeah, that thing you do really stuck out as a great movie, and my wife really loves Tom Hanks, so she was really excited because she just loved Tom Hanks movies, and so she
Yeah,
was
who
like, "Oh,
doesn't?
and that's the thing is like that day we were it wasn't like either of us were like, well, no, we're not going to see this one thing, or I don't want to see this kind. We saw, I think, like a horror movie that day. I think we saw, like a sci-fi movie. We saw That Thing You Do. I think, we saw like a historical epic or something. It was like whatever was there, we were going to see. It was a theater with eight screens, and we saw 5 of the 10 movies.
That's awesome.
And so that stuck out. So again, that has become our movie. So I end up watching this movie at least once a year. I know it backwards and forwards. I even
That's
reference
great.
it randomly throughout my movies,
Aw.
in small ways, just because it is a movie. But beyond it being sort of a special movie in my marriage, it's an absolute movie that I love. It's an absolutely great movie that I absolutely love.
It really is. And on that note, I'm going to read the synopsis really quick. Now, if you haven't seen this movie before, I do recommend that you pause here, go watch the movie and come back, because I don't do like a spoiler wall or anything like that. We're just going to chat about it. Not that there's big spoilers to this movie, but
Yeah.
I would recommend seeing it first. So if you're still with us, this is the synopsis of That Thing You Do. So That Thing You Do is a 1996 American comedy film. This is written and directed by Tom Hanks, as Christopher mentioned, and this is his directorial debut. It tells the story of the rise and the fall of a 1960s one-hit wonder pop band, and that's pretty much it. Like, it's about their rise and fall. But I think we'll touch on it. I really, really like this film a lot. I like some of the lessons that it has within it. But yeah, essentially, it's about a one-hit wonder following the
Yeah.
rise and fall of a band. Um, I had a couple of quick facts that I wanted to share. This is the film debut of Tom Everett Scott, and Tom Hanks was initially opposed to hiring Scott because he looks so much like a younger Hanks.
Yep.
He was finally convinced by his wife, Rita Wilson, who thought Scott was cute. I did kind of get the feeling, okay, this may be a weird statement to say, but when I watch this movie, I kind of feel like I'm watching a bunch of Tom Hanks. Like, I just feel that he wove elements of his personality so much into the main characters and their dialogue that it's like, and I mean, they're all like white dudes that are kind of lanky for the most part.
Right.
So they kind of, I don't
Plus,
know.
like
They
his
just,
entire like family's in it too,
yeah, and,
in
and
small
they just
roles here and there.
evoke different roles Tom Hanks has played in other movies almost. But I mean this in the best way. It was really
It's
good.
Tom Hanks the movie.
Yes. Apparently, he also claims that he wrote the script while on the promotional tour for Forrest Gump because his boredom during nonstop interviews, which I can't imagine doing that. Like, whenever I see, you know, there's always a couple interviews on YouTube and stuff of actors either being like kind of like jerks in interviews or
Hmm.
giving like the interviewer a hard time. And I always feel really bad for the journalist. I'm not a journalist, but I have interviewed people, and I'm like, that's a tough job when the person seems disinterested. But I understand, like, when you're answering the same like 10 questions every hour for like months, I'm sure it's terrible. So
Well,
I
yeah,
can
and I think
imagine that being draining and wanting to do something else with your free time.
and I can totally understand that to a certain extent. As a guy who makes movies and has gone out, and I do a lot of conventions and a lot of events, and it's always kind of the same sales pitch, right? And you're traveling, and you're promoting things, that when you get to the point where you're promoting a movie, like you've probably, as an actor, been done with it for like 6 months to a year, right? So you
Right.
gotta, and you always end up having to tell the same stories over and over again to the same ones, and always have to act as excited that someone asked a question that you've been asked 400 times different, different ways. And you're, like I said, you're traveling, you're tired, you're worn out, and sometimes, it probably gets to be too much for some people. Or you get stupid questions, and you're just like, I'm just not in the mood for this crap right now anymore. You know?
I kind of love those though, where they come right out and say, "Please stop asking me those questions."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I
I mean,
totally
I
understand.
get it, but I totally understand what you're saying. Is like, and two, even as a guy who's done a lot of conventions and traveling and stuff, there's always downtime too, where it's just like, well, I could watch TV, I suppose, or maybe I have an
Yeah, it's
idea
just
for a
weird because
thing. I
you're
mean,
not
I
like
know,
at home. You don't
yeah.
have your stuff, your streaming services. Yeah, it's a little different.
I
When I
mean, what's
traveled for
funny
work, I
too
felt
is
that
like,
way too. I read a lot of books traveling.
yeah, I did the movie I actually just released this year, The Family Kids and the Beast Walks Among Us. Had to get in my plug. Um, I actually started writing while I was traveling, doing conventions down in the DFW area. I was down there doing AllCon in 2018 or 2019, I think. It was 2019. That's when we filmed it, and I was talking about this idea I had with our late great friend Marco Cross, and he and I were sort of bouncing ideas back off of each other about this idea it had, and I couldn't quite crack something, and he said something specifically that like cracked it open. Right? It was like, that's the angle I've been missing. And as soon as he said that, like, the doors open and all the ideas flooded in for what I needed to do. So like that night when I was just back in my hotel room, I started writing the script on my phone because it was just like the floodgates open and I had to get it. And I get it. It's just that
Yeah.
something hits you, and I got this downtime, and I know it's like, this is it. This is when I start doing it, and you start, the begin, like, by the time I got home, I had, I think, 15 pages that I showed my kids because they're all the characters in the movie,
Oh,
and they were
yeah.
like, this is amazing, let's keep going. And so from
Yay.
there, it just snowballed.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to being in a different location and having that downtime, like you said. I also read that the four actors playing the Wonders rehearsed as a band for 8 weeks to get the feel of performing, but ultimately most of their performances in the film were dubbed by other musicians.
Right,
Probably
which
the
is
right call.
understandable. Yeah, I mean, if you've
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't write the song, and sadly, the guy who did died of COVID very early on.
Are you
In
serious? I did not
Yeah, it was
realize that.
God, I'm blanking on the guy's name. But he was from the band Fountains of Wayne.
Oh, wow.
Um, he wrote and sings and performs the big hit song in the movie, That Thing You Do, and he was one of the first celebrities to die of it, like
Wow,
very
that's
early
terrible.
on during the pandemic, like in May or June or something like that of 2020.
Wow. Wow. That's tragic. I was
Everything
wondering
always
about
comes
that.
back to this horribleness, right?
Well, I mean, it's happening.
Uh,
Um, but I think that song was even nominated for an Oscar, right? Yeah,
yep,
Best Original Song by Adam Schlesinger. Does
there it
that
is.
sound
Yeah,
right?
Adam
Yeah, yeah,
Schlesinger.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, Definitely nominated. I don't know that it won, but it was
I don't
nominated
think
for
it
the best
won.
song. Yeah.
Uh,
But it is a super catchy song, and it sounds
well, and
like,
that's the thing. It
early
has to be,
Beatles.
right?
Yeah.
It
Hmm.
had to be the right amount of catchy without being annoying,
And
because you
without
hear it
being
like
deep.
8 times in the movie,
Very
right?
true. I hadn't thought about
So
that.
it has to be of that era. It has to just have that feel of the early '60s, kind of pre, as the British invasion is happening. It has to have that catchiness. But again, it can't be annoying. It has to be
Right.
something that you could find yourself singing and not being like, oh, I hate that song so much.
That's a very good point. I never even
And,
thought about how many times you
and
hear it in the movie.
yeah, and it's 8 times. And honestly, and I should say is one of my favorite things about that movie, having seen it so many times too. Uh, One of the things that grabbed me is that the movie is ultimately about sort of making art and celebrating sort of being a nobody as an artist, right?
Yeah.
Because these guys just, I mean, the main character, guy, the drummer, ends up in the band by accident because the Wonders, the band, their drummer breaks his arm on
Yeah.
the eve of them doing this talent show at this college. And so they find this guy who, is just a local kid working at his parents' appliance store, who plays the drums that they know from high school or growing up there. And so they enlist him to come in. And in the process, um, this song, That Thing You Do, that they had written as a ballad, he turns into basically an up-tempo rock hit, right? And
Hmm.
because of that, everything from there spirals out of control in a good way, and they become, they go from literal nobodies to suddenly they're on TV, they're in a major motion picture, all these things that happens very quickly in like 2 months. And so it's this whirlwind of crazy. And ultimately, I think one of the things that grabbed me about the movie very early on is being a guy who, especially when I was 20, I was a drummer in a band.
Oh,
I was like
wow.
playing in a bunch of bands since I was like 13. Uh, it struck me at that where it's just like it really does sort of effectively show the joy of like writing music and performing it. And one of the things I really like about the movie is that every time they play the song, the even the sound engineering on the particular performance changes each time. And
Mm.
this is what comes from watching it every year for 20 years. Is you start noticing these things is that the first time they play it, just the way everything sounds like it would being in like a gymnasium where they're playing it, right, just at a thing that's not as it's not as tight, it's not as professional. Now every time they go, then it goes to them playing it at a bar, and it's the sound quality sounds more like a bar. They're still not perfect on the song, but it's they're almost there. And then they record it, so you get the sound of the way they record it in a big church, right? And then it goes from there. Every time you hear it, it gets bigger and bigger each time, until they finally play it at a big, um, state fair and all these things, and it gets bigger and bigger each time. And it's just like it's the subtle things like that where it's like every time you hear it, it's a little bit different. It's still the same song, but it gets larger. Suddenly
Hmm.
there's screaming crowds. It's like it just uh, it's a little thing that I really like about the movie is just the detail in stuff like that, where it's like they're not just playing the record every time the same. They had to record it different ways 8
Yeah.
different ways or whatever to give you a different feel for it. Even when they're on TV, it's like when they're on TV, it's perfect.
Yeah.
And and this is a bit of a spoiler, but toward the end, their band starts to fall apart because they're a one-hit wonder, right? It just everything came together too fast, and they all start to fall apart. Their bass player, who has no name, which is beautiful, he's just the bass
But
player.
played by Ethan Embry, who
Yes,
I really
who's
appreciate
fantastic in it.
because, yeah, he had this really sweet quality to him.
Yep.
In a lot of the roles that he played, sort of goofy, a little dumb, kind of like a goofier. What's that guy's name? Oh man, why do I do that? The guy from like Empire Records and the Scooby Doo movie, Matthew Lillard. He's kind of
Yep.
like a Matthew Lillard, but like a little goofier and a little less known.
Yeah, and as the bass player, literally that's his name. He has no name. He plays it. It's kind of innocent, right?
Yeah.
And he's just kind of having a good time, and he's just goofy, and he's always smiley and you know, just having fun. Well,
He's just a
so by
young,
the time
dumb
they get
guy.
right, so by the time they get to that last performance on the TV show, um, he's disappeared on them because he was going to be joining the Marines, and he ends up seeing some Marines in a restaurant, and it gets he ends up not showing up to their big TV showcase, right? And so they get a professional bass player, just a studio guy, in to play with them so that they can do the show. And even then, the bass part on the song is a little more like intricate and
Mm.
much more dead on. I mean, it's just like little things like that, and that was the part of me as being a guy who used to be a musician is like I notice little things like that where everything is just they really the detail of it and the
Yeah.
detail of the fact that it's a period piece. Everything about it to me always feels authentic and just right.
Yeah, they portray the 1960s not in sort of a cartoonish way where you're like, oh, okay, well, they tried to include, certain hallmarks of that era, but doesn't really
Right.
evoke that era. I think they keep it, I mean, it feels almost modern while you're watching it, but there's key things that make it the 60s, and it feels a little bit more honest than some movies that try a little too hard to go period. So I
Right.
agree with that. Um, for me, like revisiting this, I kind of already touched on one of the people. I love Ethan Embry because of Can't Hardly Wait, which is a movie I really enjoy. But I really like the cast. Obviously Tom Hanks. This is the third Tom Hanks movie, I believe, that we're talking about. We did Big and The Burbs, and now we're talking about this film. Liv Tyler, who is awesome in this movie. I really like the way she plays Jimmy's girlfriend, and she has her own arc that she goes through. A really young Charlize Theron. I
Oh
was
yeah,
shocked
I
when
think
I
this is
saw
like
her.
one of her first big speaking roles.
Yeah, my gosh, I was like,
Um,
whoa. Yeah, she has such a small part that
yeah,
it had to be early on in her career for her not to say anything.
I think it's one of her first speaking roles, honestly, and
Wow.
it's a tiny role. I mean, she's a supporting character that leaves the movie after the first like 20 minutes or something.
Yeah, you can tell right away. You're like, oh, this is the girlfriend that doesn't want to be here, so she
Right.
won't be around. And then I wanted to mention Steve Zahn because I happen to be watching a show with him in it randomly. Well, it's big right now, but on HBO Max, it's called White Lotus, and it's about a bunch of people staying at a resort in Hawaii. Go watch it if you're interested in drama, and it's funny too. And anyway, I like this guy. He pops up every now and again in stuff that I like, and he's a face that I hadn't seen in a while. So I was enjoying that. And then I watched this movie, and I'm like, there he is again. That's interesting when that
Well,
happens.
and
Wanted to
uh,
mention.
I absolutely I Steve Zahn. We love him around here. Let's just say he's actually from Minnesota, where I live,
Oh, I
uh,
didn't know that. I
and he
remember him
grew
the
up.
most from Joyride. That's what,
Yeah,
like, not a
he
super great movie, but I just remember watching that a lot when it came out for some reason.
Well, one of my favorite things is one of the things in this movie and that thing you do. They end up on after they finally get picked up and signed by Playtone Records, which is what Playtone Entertainment or whatever is what Tom Hanks ended up actually naming his production company
Oh,
after the
really?
record
Oh,
company in this. It's like Playtone movie, I don't know if it's Playtone Entertainment, but it's Playtone, right? Which was based
huh.
on this movie. And of course, one of the things that's cool about it, about the whole Playtone thing, and Tom Hanks in particular, before I talk about Steve Zahn, is that Tom Hanks's character is like a record exec, and he's not the nicest guy. And it's kind of nice because he's not necessarily playing like, the nice guy. He's playing he's kind of a dick. I mean,
Oh my gosh. Also, real quick, I have to say, also we covered A League of Their Own. Duh.
oh, nice.
But what's
I thought,
weird is we covered A League of Their Own, um, and then, or before that we covered The Burbs, then that, and now this in a relatively short amount of time. So everyone keeps picking Tom Hanks films. I'm not complaining, but it's just an
no,
observation. Anyway,
it's
continue.
so yeah. So Tom Hanks's character is not the most likable. He's just
Right.
kind of he's a schmoozy record exec. He's thinking about the bottom line of the record company. He doesn't
Mhm.
care so much about the artistic mind of Jimmy the singer, who's a jerk, but he's the talent, right? He's the
Yeah,
guy
I
who
mean, he
writes the
goes on to do
song.
better
He's the
apparently after they
he,
break up.
right. Right, and he's the tortured artist, and he only really cares about the music, right? And that's the thing, is everything about this movie is every character kind of plays a different, archetype of the way, I guess, probably people generally react to fame. You got the one guy who's
Right.
kind of level-headed and just is like, this is really cool. You got the one sort of starry-eyed guy who's like, I don't know why I'm here, but this is awesome. And then you got the other guy who just doesn't care. He just is enjoying it, and isn't really thinking. You have the other guy who's just like, I don't give a shit about any of this stuff. All I care about is, you know, my art, and it's like all these archetypes, right? But
Yeah.
Steve Zahn in particular, because he's from here, one of the things that I always found, just to go back to this really fast, is there's a part where they're playing the state fairs after they get picked up by Playtone Records. And they're doing just an interview on the local station, right? And the guy asks the Jimmy guy about what they're doing there, and he starts talking about the song and all the music, and he cuts him off like he just doesn't care, right? And then he talks to Steve Zahn's character, and he goes into like the full-on Minnesotan accent, which always makes me laugh. And he's like, "Oh, I'm not with these fellows over here, and it's like perfect. It's like, there it is. That's his accent from growing up around here.
Yeah.
But Steve Zahn is I think the thing about a lot of the actors, I think in particular, that are in That Thing You Do, beyond sort of the mega stars like Charlize Theron and Tom Hanks, is everyone in the movie is solid and to a certain extent underrated.
Agreed. Agreed. Very much so. And one of the things that I like about the message in this film too is looking at the rise and fall of a one-hit wonder in a non-negative way.
Yeah,
Like how how this experience shapes everyone going forward, and you don't, at the end they're not like, oh, and they all died in a plane crash, or
right.
they did drugs and they died or whatever. Like a lot of times when you watch something about a band, first of all, a lot of biopics about a band, of course it's a fictional band, but a lot of them are negative, how fame destroys you,
Right.
things like that. But I like this because it was sort of like a life lesson for every character in the film.
Yeah.
And they go on to realize their dreams through this real crazy experience. But the experience is a positive one. They get
Right.
famous a little too quick, like you said, but they walk away having grown and learned a lot. And I
Right.
love that. Like I can't really think of another music movie that's like this. I'm sure someone will prove me wrong. Who's seen more music movies than me, but I just found that very, very charming to look at that situation in a positive way instead of a
hmm
negative one.
Well, and there's sort of an old fashioned magic to the movie.
Yeah,
Is that it's like you said, there are in a lot of ways it feels very modern, right? Um, and but it is also a period piece. But at the same time, there's something old fashioned and almost corny about the movie in like the best way possible, right?
Well, yeah, because I mean, they're sort of drawing on bands from that era that
Mhm.
made corny movies,
Yeah,
and did
yeah, and
corny
it's
things like
yeah, and
wholesome
it's
Americana stuff.
right. It's wholesome. There's a lot of innocence in the whole thing, and obviously that plays really well with just like these four kids who just end up in this place where suddenly they're big and they have a hit record and they're everywhere and people are, you know, it's 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 awesome to me to watch the sort of rise of the whole thing of them going from literally playing in a garage to playing in a gym to suddenly they hear themselves on the radio, and that's one of the greatest scenes in the whole movie.
Yeah,
First hear themselves on the radio, and they all freak out, right? And it's joyful, and there's a lot of joy running through the movie. Even, I mean, there's some down times and negative parts to it, but of course that's just the arc of the story. But all in all, it's much more just it's positive in so many ways. It's joyful from beginning to end, and you see the joy in the creation of the music. You see the joy in the recording of it, in the playing of it, of the fame coming in. They get to be a band in a bad beach party movie, which that's one of my favorite damn things because I've seen all the bad AIP, uh, Frankie and Annette. Beach party movies, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
they did a perfect sort of facsimile of it in this movie where the band ends up being the fake band in one of those style, cheesy movies of that era. Um, and it's throughout it, you feel the sort of like the fun everyone's having and the everything is fresh and new and exciting and other than the Jimmy guy who's just kind of a sour person, right? Because all
well,
he
they're
cares
not
about is
playing
like
the
I want
song
to
the way
make
he wants it to be
right, and
played.
he wants to make more music, which that's fine. It's like even through that, it's not like he's just a jerk just to be a jerk, although he does have some jerky moments. To him, it's like he just wants to make music. He's an artist and he wants to create, and that's to him all that matters.
Yeah,
And
the fame
so
is extraneous to him if he's not
right. He
able
just
to
wants
make
to
his
make
art.
more.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest things, and this is the hugest spoiler, so I hope people actually watch this before listening to this, is in the end, when you find out what happens to each of them, is that he grew up to not only release more music with the record label, even after he was fighting with them the whole time, but he also then eventually becomes a record company executive.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, yeah, that sounds about right. The
Right.
kids who fight the system the hardest sometimes end up becoming the system.
Sure, sure. That makes sense. And also I feel like it's positive because they're all young. They have a flash in the pan moment, it goes away, but I like that that's not the end of their story, and it's kind of a
Right.
good life lesson. Like you may get a lot of attention over something and a lot of praise, and then that could go away after that, and that can
Yeah,
be kind of
nothing.
crushing. But they mature and realize later on in their lives that that wasn't the end. That was just one
Right.
highlight of a whole life. And so I just, again, I keep mentioning it, but I just really like the way their stories kind of wrapped up that you're kind of talking about there.
Well, and I think that's one of the cool things about it too, is like you see um a lot of music biopics, right? Is that it always sort of hits so much on sort of the big moments, right? Of like, here's the rise and then the fall, right? And in this, it just happens so quickly. It's like, no, this wasn't the end all be all of who these people are.
Yeah.
And like you said, you see that no, this was just part of their life, and this is the everyone's. It's like you may be someone who strives to be an Olympian, but once you go to the Olympics and you win gold, what now? That's not the end. There's still other stuff to do, and this movie does a really good job with these characters of just like you said. It's like, okay, yeah, they did this thing, and it was this whirlwind of crazy awesomeness, and then at the end of it they still had lives. They still had other things, and they accomplished other things. And I don't know. It's everything about it. I find no real flaws in any of it.
Yeah, I agree. I had so much fun rewatching it, and like you said, there's a lot of joy in the movie, a lot of highlights, and even when there's disappointments, they're kind of short-lived. They work through them and they move on. You don't.
And somewhat realistic too. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not. It's and you don't get into like someone becomes a heroin addict or anything like that, which is kind of nice to just be
Yeah.
like, how
Well,
about the guy really wanted to join the military, so he left the band early. It's like stuff like
right.
that.
I think sometimes there's this temptation as a society for us to comfort ourselves with the thoughts that people that are really rich and famous are all miserable, but I don't think that's realistic. I
No.
think it's just like, oh, well, that's the price they have to pay. Yeah, there's some famous people that are, I'm sure, relatively normal and well adjusted, and as much as that may disappoint you, like
Right.
they don't
Exactly.
have to pay for it. So I agree with you. I like seeing that because it just seems more believable to me. And I feel like the actors, one thought I had watching it was that I don't know what age it is that we reach where we realize this, but I think as we get older, we start to realize that people that become famous and really successful are not always necessarily the very, 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 very best at what they do, but
Right.
they do sell a dream of what we wish we had. The
Right.
reason why all the rock stars and all the pop stars stay in their 20s and beautiful and they're so excited to be there and they're like, "Oh my God, now I won a Grammy," is because it's like they're sort of playing out a fantasy we want too. So they're carrying their fame and then our like dreams of it on top of that. Is that too weird to say? I mean, whenever I see like a new rock band or like a new pop star, I think that. I think what's appealing about them is not just their talent, but also that they're so young and that they're so famous all of a sudden. And I think
Right.
that's what happens to one hit wonders too. The difference being that they don't necessarily, like in this case, all stay a band because I don't know how organic it was that they got together. Like you said, there was some happenstance. They don't all
Right.
necessarily get along, but the artists that really stick around are able to go through that. But it's like 50% of what people are attracted to is just the fact that they're so young. It's
Right.
like that's a
Well,
big
on top
part of it.
on top of all that too, I think that this is being just kind of a weird little microcosm of how things are. Is that
Yeah,
um, fame is fleeting.
sure.
What's big today is not going to be what's big tomorrow. I mean,
Right.
um, there are bands like the Beatles that have sort of universal longevity, right? But how many other bands are like the Beatles?
And how
You
long were the
know,
Beatles the Beatles? Not that long,
right.
actually.
Well, that's what I mean is, yeah, they
Yeah.
weren't together that long, but yes, their music has stood the test of time. But take, go back 20 years, who was the biggest it person at that time, and where
Yeah.
are they now? Go
Right.
back, it's like you have these I don't know, musicians or filmmakers or whatever that they reach this sort of like pinnacle, right? They're just like
Hmm.
they're the it person. They're around everywhere you go, and then 5, 10 years later, where do they end up?
Well,
Where are they?
maybe this was part of Tom Hanks being like, "Look, I'm really famous right now as an actor, but if that starts to fade, I have other avenues that I could
Right.
continue
Not everyone
creating and
can
doing
be
well."
right.
Now, of course, he stayed Tom Hanks forever because he's Tom
Right.
Hanks, but
But
maybe he
how
was
many Tom
thinking about stuff
Hankses
like
are there
that.
compared to other actors, right? Even
Yeah,
the
yeah.
actors in this movie, it's like, have any of them really had, a moment in the sun where they were the it person? I mean,
Charlize
uh,
Theron, I guess that's it.
it's like
Ironically,
nobody is ever at the top forever.
right,
I
right.
remember in the '90s, Liv Tyler was everywhere.
Yeah, yeah,
She
that's
was in
true.
Armageddon, and it's like, where the hell has she been for the last 20 years?
You see
You
her every
know,
now and then. I feel like I saw
right?
something with her
It's
recently, but you're right. She's not who she was then, and
right,
and that's such a good point that like, okay, this movie's kind of like maybe you're not going to stay at the top forever, and maybe that's okay. Maybe you'll do something else after that, and maybe even that will have more meaning. Like her character in the movie, she kind of starts out as just the supportive girlfriend,
right,
but her relationship with Guy evolves and change, and we find out later they run a business together.
right.
So she had, and I thought that watching the movie too, I felt like she had business smarts and she was so invested and so passionate. I thought like it's kind of unfortunate she's just that guy's girlfriend. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I'm happy she's getting excited, but it's like she's taking so much ownership of something she doesn't actually get to have, but then at the end of the credits we find out that eventually she does. So it's like,
Right.
yeah, but anyway, that was rambly, but my point is that it's not the end, like you said. It's maybe it's just the beginning, and maybe the fame part isn't the most interesting part of it.
Well, and I think that's the trajectory of kind of everything to a certain extent, is that there's nothing is always, it's not always just up, right?
Yeah,
There's no matter what happens, there will be a down unless you're like someone who dies in their prime, right?
right. Like a buddy
Um,
holly or something. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, but generally, if you live long enough, eventually you go over the hump and you start going back down. I mean, that's
Well,
just life, right? And
yeah.
that's again the sort of microcosm of the one-hit wonder phenomenon too. Is like you rise for as your meteoric rise, you got to eventually come back down.
Well, I think there's someone that Tom Hanks interacts with. I think it's uh Del Paxton. Is that right?
Oh, the the
Played by Bill
jazz,
Cobbs.
yeah,
Yeah,
he's fantastic.
and
Man.
and he has some extremely good advice for him where he says, bands come and go. You have to just
Right,
keep creating. Um, they're not always going to stick together. You just have to keep finding people that are passionate like you
right,
and want to keep doing this. And then he later goes on to hire him because he sees in him that, he is passionate, that he cares about the music, and that he's actually good. But I thought that piece of advice where he was like, stop focusing so much on this band being together forever,
right,
is kind of like a meta way of saying, like, stop focusing so much on your moment right now because it's gonna change.
right.
So that's okay. You have to change with it. And I don't know, I just thought that was a good part of the movie too.
Well, and he even said that the whole thing. It's because that's one of the undercurrents of the movie. If anyone is is that Guy, the drummer that they pick up, is actually really into jazz, and he likes this fictional jazz character named Del Paxton, who he eventually meets in a bar when he's out in
And
Hollywood.
kind of makes a fool of himself when he's drunk, but has
Right,
a lasting
but
impression on him.
right, and the Del Paxton, says, eventually something makes you crazy, and that's true. It's like eventually, no matter how much you love something, making movies, making music, whatever, eventually something's going to make you crazy.
Hmm.
It's going to drive you nuts. It's never always going to be the same. It can't.
Yeah.
That's life. Is that things evolve and change over time, and there's nothing you can do to fight it. You can just keep trying to do your best and keep going, and if you're still interested, keep doing it. If not, it's okay to walk away.
Yeah.
It's just and then you know what's one of the best things he says is like, look out for your money. Like
Yeah.
that is a very good thing. The other thing too, I want to say, I think one of the things that really grabbed me when I first saw it, going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, was I mentioned at the time I was in a band, right? And
Hmm.
I think one of the things the movie does really well, from a perspective of a person who was a drummer in a band, is give you that sort of feel of what it's like to be in a group, and the group dynamics that come into it with the different personalities of all
Yeah.
the members. Um, where like the one guy's just kind of he's doing his thing, another guy's like, oh my god, this is great, and then the other guy who's just like, oh, I don't like care about writing songs. And it's just like all the dynamics that come in when you have a group of people working together toward a project. It's the group project mentality.
Yeah.
um, it did a great job of dramatizing it but making it fun
Yeah.
in the
I can
same way
definitely
that
see that.
I felt when I was in bands making music with other guys.
Ah, I like that. Yeah. I can definitely see that, having not been in a band myself, but everyone's, like you said, worked on a group project, right?
Yeah.
Where you have to negotiate with different personalities. I also think
Yeah.
it's interesting that it is from the perspective of a drummer, and I don't think we see that very often in film.
No.
Usually it's either the guitar player or the lead singer.
Right.
So that I thought that was interesting too, and that he's sort of like the core and the heart, that's sort of propelling them forward, but it's just not enough to keep them all together because they're
Right.
so
Exactly.
different. Yeah.
Well, and it was just so like you said, just happenstance that guy even ends up in the band, and then the fact that they get big is only because he happened to be in the band and then play it wrong at their talent show, and it's all these things that just kind of happen. And I think that's usually more realistic than not, is that a person can work forever at doing the same thing and they can be a master of their craft, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're ever going to become big at it or even
Yeah.
make a living at it. Sometimes it's just right. A lot of times it's just right place, right time, knowing the right people or running into the right person at the right moment. And so,
100%. Especially,
yeah,
Jimmy really feels that in the movie because he's the talent. He's the talented one.
yeah,
And yet it's this drummer that comes in with this idea that propels him forward. So it's like it makes him feel less than because all his talent is sort of like not being appreciated essentially.
right.
But you're right. I remember my dad said this when I was a kid and I never forgot it. He said, you think that everyone you see on TV, you're like, oh, that is so amazing. They're so special and different because they're up there and they're famous. And he's like, you could go to a bar down the street and listen to someone that's really good at singing or really good at guitar. Like
Hmm.
talented people are everywhere. They're just not all famous, but
Right,
they're everywhere. And I
right.
kind of never forgot that. And I agree. And that's not to diminish the talent of people that are famous because
No, no, no.
obviously they are talented or they wouldn't be there. But at the same time, there's a lot of people
Well,
that never
that's
get to that point.
debatable.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But um,
But again, that
yeah,
demonstrates the same point of just like sometimes it's just you got lucky,
yeah,
and luck
exactly.
plays a large role in the level of fame certain people experience. I
Yeah,
mean, you could have the
100%.
most talented guitar player in the world who just never plays outside of some couple bars in a Cincinnati or something,
Yeah,
because they're
yeah,
just never discovered, quote unquote, by the right people,
yeah.
and end up getting that sort of big moment.
Or not everyone that's that talented is wanting to pursue it as a career either.
Exactly. Some people just
Yeah.
it's their happy place, but it's like as soon as you turn something you love into work, there's that old saying about do what you love and you never work a day in your life. It's crap. That is a lie because once you turn something you love into work, it's work. And
Yeah.
as soon as you add pressures of having to like pay your bills with it, it changes it. No matter how much you love something, it's still work.
Yeah,
And you're
100%.
still
I'm
going to
glad you
have to
said that.
look at it in a different way
We live in
because
a
it's
culture right now that wants to turn every hustle into everything into a hustle, everything into the grind, and
right.
you're probably better off. That's fine if that's your dream, but it's also okay to just enjoy your passions as well.
Yeah. And realize that once you do turn your hustle into a work, your job, it's different. It's immediately different. And I know that firsthand because I've turned making movies into a job, right? It originally started as just a hobby and now it's what I do. But it changes the way I look at it. It changes the way I have to approach some of these things and um to a certain extent it becomes like a great motivator where it's just like I could easily get lazy and stop making movies, but I kind of can't, which is kind of good because then it also kicks me in the butt to keep doing it because I do love it. But there are some times where I'm like, I don't really feel like doing this.
Yeah.
But then I got to wonder, is that just me being burnt out? Is it me just being sick of it? And I know a lot of times it comes up to when it starts because it's that feeling of, well, it's my job. I have to. You take
Right.
that out of it, of the I want to, where it's just like, no, I have to. It starts to grind a little. I mean, yes, I'll admit, as a guy who does what he loves for a job, yes, I would much rather do this than anything else. But it's still work. And it's still, there are days where I absolutely hate it because I have to do it. And I don't necessarily want to, but I know I have to. And that's like any job,
Yeah,
is like you have to
absolutely.
do it. You just don't want it, but you gotta.
Yeah, I
And I
completely
know
understand that.
I know you and I could talk forever, so I want to make sure I get in one more point
Okay,
before
go
we
for it.
have to wrap it up.
Oh, that's
One
fine.
of the reasons I absolutely love that thing you do is the time, like the setting, the
Yeah,
the
60s.
the the I'm. Again, I'm a filmmaker who makes cheesy monster movies that would easily fit into the late 50s, early 60s. Okay, I love that era. I love drive-ins. I love everything about just the aesthetic of it all. And part of it is just the sort of innocence of the era, because it was really the beginnings of going from I don't know. It's the dawn of the technological age, right? It's the space age, computer age, pre-internet age, where it's just like everything seemed kind of possible, right?
Hmm.
And there is this still an innocence behind a lot of things that still you can still see in the movies of that era. Like, for instance, I recently watched a movie called High School Hellcats, which is from the late 50s. And it's one of those American International pictures that follows like a bunch of bad girls in high school, right? And their version of what makes a bad girl is laughable by modern standards, right? And so you watch that, and there's just such a wide-eyed innocence to it all. Because like the girls drink gin, it's like, oh my God. Um, you
Call the
know,
cops. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh my God. It's too much. And so one of the things about that thing you do that I love so much is it captures that feeling so well. And it's an era that I really, really like. And so there are certain movies that capture that era, like Ed Wood. I really love Ed Wood. We talked
Yeah.
about. It's that sort of late 50s, early 60s movies, music, everything about that thing you do captures so perfectly. And everything just feels authentic to that era, from, guy works in his parents' appliance store, and everything in there is like really nice vintage appliances and stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, Even the main street that the appliance store is on is just it's perfect. Everything about
Hmm.
it, everything, even the instruments they play. And that was another thing that I read, which was that, when they start, the instruments they're playing are all like cheap thrift store type instruments, right? They're the stuff you could order out of catalogs, uh, that sort of normal people could afford. It would be the kind of stuff that you go drop a little money down at the Sears to get a guitar, because you wanted to learn how to play it. And then as they progress, their instruments get more expensive
Yeah.
as they are suddenly provided by the record label. You start seeing just like a slow progression of the stuff they wear, and the going from just clothes they own to like nice suits and all this stuff. And it's just, again, it's that level of detail that I love about setting that moment in time that the movie takes place. And Tom Hanks, I have to imagine, is just like, that's his childhood right up there, right? That's the stuff he
Right.
grew up, um or at least the sort of, when he was a kid, the kind of things that he saw around him. And it just comes through so beautifully in that movie that it just really works.
Yeah. Completely agree. Well, I guess I'll ask you the last couple of questions then.
Sure.
Uh,
Should be like
what,
another hour or two when it comes to you and I.
what,
That's the
huh?
longest winded. We always
Oh,
have the
no, not at
longest wind.
all. What? No way. I'm not trying to cut you off at all. You just mentioned that was the last thing you were going to talk about, so
No,
I'm
I
terrible at
want to make sure I
segues.
got that in there before I
Oh,
forgot.
for sure.
I have my
Um,
mental list of things I wanted to talk about.
no, I'm glad you did. Um, so this brings me to my last couple of questions. Number one, if you could summarize everything we've talked about today, why do you think you keep coming back to this movie? Like, what's the main reason you've seen it so many times?
I mean, obviously, beyond the fact that it is sort of my wife and my movie, right? Beyond that is just that, um, I never get sick of it. It's pure cinematic comfort food, right? It's like, why do you always eat have a ham on Easter or whatever? It's like, why do you do these things? It's like tradition to a point
Yeah.
where I know it backwards and forwards. So it's like, I know that when I watch this film, not only do I know what's going to happen, fine, but I always find little things every time I watch it, because I'm at that point now where it's like the minute details are the only things that surprise me anymore, where it's like, I never noticed that before upon my 400th viewing. Um, but it's just the comfort of it. Again, it's a positive film. It's entertaining from beginning to end. There are no real slow points. And the damn song is still catchy. I mean, it really is its own kind of one-hit wonder, where it's like, I mean, you can hear a song that you've heard 1,000 times on the radio, and it's something you know and love. It's fine. You'll sing along, because it's like, well, it's audio comfort food. This is,
Yeah.
to me, is cinematic comfort food.
I think that's a really good way to put it. I keep saying it on the podcast, but it's been a tough time recently, and every time someone picks like a cheer me up kind of movie, I appreciate it, and I found this movie to be, just comforting, like you said,
And hopeful.
yeah, and hopeful, exactly, and again, I just love the message. I can't. It's kind of like the message in Soul, that came out this
Yeah.
year. That it was basically like sometimes just enjoying that thing you love is enough. And
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful message. And also to go on and teach. The main character in the movie ends up teaching jazz,
Yeah.
and that's not something that people used to say, if you can't do it, you teach. But again, it's so disrespectful to teachers, first of
Yeah.
all, and
What's
they're
wrong with
so
that?
essential. The biggest thing they give up is just the credit, but they did the work, and so
Yeah.
I always appreciate movies that highlight how important that is.
Well, and honestly, as a filmmaker myself, who makes the kind of cheesy niche underground films that I do, I mean, early on, uh, I identify with this to a certain extent, because early on it was like, I'm making a movie, so I'm going to go be in Hollywood in a year, right? Right? I'm going to be tapped to direct the next Marvel movie, right? Right? But over time, continuing to do this, I realized that I don't care if I get famous, and you know what? I seriously doubt I ever will be. I pretty much know I probably won't be, and I'm actually okay with that, because it made me, over the last 15 years of doing that, of making movies and continue to do so, is that I realized that my own definition of success was not exactly what you think everyone sort of thinks of, right? Is like, well, you're not a successful filmmaker unless make a big budget movie that wins an Oscar or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not true. Uh, any one particular person's definition of success is going to change depending on who you are. And I realized that, to me, the ability to continue to make films it's my definition of success. I want to be able
Yeah,
to continue to do it. And that's the thing about sort of this movie too, is like, it's about the definition of success. What is success?
yeah,
Uh, and
100%.
you know,
I had a friend that used to say, I'm sure they probably have changed their stance on this now, but they were like, you know what happens to most people? You just give up and you work on someone else's dream. Like if you take a lesser role than being the main person in charge, you're working on someone else's dream, or you phone it in and you just get a real job and blah blah blah. They went on and on about it, and I was like, I have such a different view of that.
yeah,
Um, like lately, it's been really popular to crap on people that do a 9 to 5 job. Being able to find a job that's 9 to 5 that has great benefits and pays you well is a huge privilege. That a lot of us, that is our definition of success.
yeah,
And I have always felt that the kinds of jobs that I've picked, or the kinds of jobs that I end up in, again, I feel lucky, very lucky, but they enable me to do the things that I really feel passionate about. And to me, that's my level of success. I enjoy doing the show. I could do more, I feel like, to advertise and get it to be bigger, but
hmm
I want to do the show as long as I enjoy it.
yeah,
And right now, for me, that means it being a side gig, and so I don't necessarily compare myself to others, their ratings and stuff. I celebrate my wins, but to me, being able to have the show every week and all the people that I've met through it, all the lasting real friendships I've made through it, and the ability to talk about film every week, that to me, that's success, you know? So yeah, I think I'm always drawn to stuff like this because of that, because I do have that perspective on life. And it's most people's stories too, by the way. Like most people are not super famous and rich, right? So,
Well, you got to
you
ask,
know,
if you're going to be an artist, if you're going to create things, you got to ask yourself, well, why do I do it?
yeah,
What is the point? Why do I do it? Is it because it's like someone who says, well, if you're living someone else's dream, well, what is your dream? Is your dream the fame? It's like, is that what you're going for? Is it that you just want to be famous and adored and treated like a rock star? If that's your goal, then fine, you got to build that. You got to get to that. But
yeah,
if you're someone who just likes to act or write songs or whatever, is that enough?
yeah,
Is that what you really want to do? For me, I just want to keep making movies. That's it. And so again, it becomes like my definition of success. If that's if that's what I define as success, then I consider myself rather successful. Have I
yeah.
made $1 million? No, I have not. But I don't I
Me
don't
neither.
care.
I'll let you know when that happens, though.
Yeah, I've made now 17 films. And to me, that's fine.
Yeah,
That's what I want. I wanted to be able to make movies, and so I feel rather successful. And that's again, that's the whole Del Paxton talking to the guy is like, you just got to keep going if that's what you want. You just got to
yeah,
keep trying. One band is not the end of it. You
right.
know,
100%.
bands come and go. Just figure out what works for you.
Mm-hmm. And so how would you pitch this movie to someone that hasn't seen it before?
I would probably just say, if you're looking for just a feel good period piece that's got catchy tunes and just,
And Tom Hanks.
and Tom Hanks, this is it. Is it absolutely perfect? To me, it kind of is.
I
It's a
was like, what's
great
he gonna
song.
say?
Yeah, it's a great song, a great film. Everything about it is just, if you want to just like enjoy sort of a simple, straightforward story that's told in a very old-fashioned way, but not in an obnoxiously old-fashioned way. This is it. I mean, it's I don't know. Again, it's cinematic comfort food to me. It's like it's perfect as far as I'm concerned. Even the flaws are perfect because it's part of the overall, meal.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would say, this is a popular film. It's not the most popular music film, but it's a real feel-good film that is enjoyable and has Tom Hanks. I think that's that's all I got.
Exactly.
Um, well, Christopher, thank you so much again for taking time out of your day to be on the show. I always appreciate having you on. Always appreciate our discussions. Where can people find you?
Sure. Well, you can always find me on all the social medias if you search for my last name, Mihm, M-I-H-M. There aren't a lot of us out there. You're usually going to find Chris Mihm, the basketball player who hasn't played for the last like 10 plus years, or you'll find my movies, or just look for Christopher Mihm or whatever. Otherwise, go to my website at sainteuphoria.com, all spelled out, SAINTEUPHORIA.com. Or if that's too hard, if you go to thegiantspider.com, you'll find me.
I just got your shirt in the mail. I sent you a picture. I
Yep.
bought one of your shirts. That was my favorite design. I just loved seeing all the monsters.
Well, and that was fun to do. And actually, I mean, there are some things from like my movie Cave Women on Mars. Nothing is in it from that because it's a 4x4 grid, right, of pictures of the monsters. And I was like, I don't have enough space because if I added the like monkey monster guy from Cave Women on Mars, it would have been like 17
Hmm.
different pictures, which would have been strange. So I was like, well, I can leave that off because that was sort of a store-bought costume. Um, and I had another movie with like two monsters, and I was like, I'll just put those both in there because they're much cooler. But yeah, I really like that design, and actually, it's an update because 8 years ago, like I said, I'm working on movie 17 now, but I've released 16 of them, so it was like, well, I got 16 monsters. 8 years ago, I had released one that had the eight, so I just did an update of all the new ones. And
Oh, okay.
I like the design of it. I like the sort of cartoony sort of I don't know, posterized kind of look to
I
it.
feel that it provokes questions because people are going
Yes,
to
it
be like,
does.
"Oh, where are those monsters
You're
from?"
like,
And then you
what
can,
is that exactly?
yeah, I really like that one. The "You've been dinner rolled" I thought was very funny. Um,
I bought that without telling my son is on that, right? He's just a picture of him holding a dinner roll. It says you've been dinner roll. I bought that shirt and didn't tell him, and then just put it on to see how long it would take before he's like, "Hey, wait a minute, that's me."
that's cute. I like that one and the Phantom Lake ones too. I was gonna buy that, but then I saw the monster
You
ones and I
know,
was like, okay, I'll
I
buy that second.
recently I recently released a few shirts. I started just making sort of random ones. When an idea for a shirt hits me, I'll do it, and so I'll have these like spurts where I put out suddenly three or four different shirts. And I did one which was a travel like touristy one for I that said I'd rather be in Phantom Lake County,
Yeah.
and it just shows like a picture of a lake with the monster in it coming out of it, the
Yeah.
monster Phantom Lake coming out of Phantom Lake, and it was a play on some other shirt I saw for I don't remember where it was. I'd rather be in like I think it was
Maybe
I'd rather be
Crystal
in like
Lake, like
actually I
for
think it said it
yeah.
was like I'd rather be in Cape Town, South Africa. It was like this is an interesting design. And I was like, I should totally do one that would be for Phantom Lake County. And
Uh,
I thought of that design. And ever since I put that out, like I have sold, I don't know, like 40 of them in like a month. Like it's
wow.
the best selling shirt
So,
I've
so
ever
you design all
released.
the shirts too?
Yeah, yeah.
That's crazy. See, again, this is a unique ability you have to also be the designer of all these things too. Like you're not, hiring someone to design them. That's really cool. Well, did you get all your plugs in? I feel like I cut you off. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think, like I said, if people find me on social media, if you just look up Christopher R. Mihm or Christopher Mihm, you'll probably find me. And then say euphoria.com, or like I said, thegiantspider.com.
Great. Well, thank you again for coming on, and obviously I have to have you back soon.
Sounds good.